When I was 15, a drug deal gone bad resulted in a shooting. A man lost his leg, and another ended up in jail. My stepdad was the drug dealer. He sold weed, nothing hard like coke or meth, as far as I know. Skipping over the specifics on who got hit or why, toward the end of this chaotic and impactful night, my biological father came to pick me up. As I climbed into the back of his truck, I saw a tall, towering, white figure at the edge of the house we lived in. Specifically, the part of the house my bedroom was located. I barely caught a glimpse of the figure before it disappeared behind the end of the house. I was positive I was seeing things. There was no way that I legitimately saw a glowing figure over 20 feet tall so bluntly in the pitch black dead of night. I had to be imagining it. The experiences of that night must have made my imagination run wild. My stepdad was forced to pull a gun on the men who were trespassing. After repeatedly asking them to leave and calling 911, my stepdad pulled his shotgun from the closet and turned it on the men that he faced. I feel lucky that the situation turned out the way it did that night. My stepdad faced two armed men, stood his ground and protected me, my mother, and my younger stepsister from these two trespassers, who, I might add, were convicted felons that were recently released from prison. I can't make sense of the bright figure that I spotted near my bedroom. Was it my guardian angel? I felt a sense of peace when I saw it. It didn't matter what had happened that night. After seeing the figure, strangely, I knew everything would be okay. I grew up in a tiny village. It was literally just a 1 kilometer long street, surrounded by houses. People who live there know each other from diapers. When I was a kid, my neighbor died in her sleep. She was an old lady, so nobody was surprised, but it was a pretty huge tragedy. Imagine my shock when years after her death, I learned that she died. Again. Her name was very unique, so there's no way I'm mistaking her for anyone else, but I clearly remember her dying when I was a child. When I was like 14 or 15, I had my PC in this sort of hallway. For context, when you come up the stairs in my house at the time, there was a double door right in front that led to the master bedroom, and then to the right there was a small hallway. On the left side of the end, there was a desk with a door in front that led to my room, and a door on the right that led to another bedroom. Anyway, there was this built-in desk in the hallway in front of my room, and that's where my PC was. If you look to my left, you'd see part of the staircase, and the entrance to the master bedroom, and the loft. It was quite common for my stepmom at the time to come to bed much later than my dad, and she usually just said goodnight to me as she walked into her room. On this particular night, I saw her come up the stairs, and she went into the room, and as she went in, I said goodnight, but she didn't respond, so I thought, okay, that's weird, but I continued doing my thing on my PC. Fast forward maybe 20 minutes later, and I decided to go downstairs and get a soda. As I was walking downstairs, I could see outside to our patio, and to my surprise, my stepmom was outside, playing on her phone and smoking a cigarette. My original thought was maybe she had come back down and I didn't see her. I opened the sliding glass door, and I asked her something along the line of, "I didn't see you come back downstairs. I thought you went to bed." She said, "No, I haven't been in the house. I was going to bed soon though." This is where it gets a little creepy and enters the realm of being possibly paranormal. Keep in mind, I'm pretty skeptical, but this particular experience is really weird and hard for me to explain. After she told me that she hadn't gone to her room, I said, "But I saw you go in, and I said goodnight, but you didn't respond." She kind of thought for a second and said, "You know, it's possible that you saw my sister." I responded, No way, that was you." What sent chills down my spine was when she said, "No, my older sister looks almost exactly like me. She died in a crash years ago." She proceeded to go get a picture off of our fridge and showed it to me. The picture was what I thought was a teenage picture of my stepmom with some other girl that I thought was maybe her cousin or something. The girl that I thought was my stepmom as a teenager was actually her older sister, and the other girl was my stepmom. This was very strange to me, but here we were, and her sister could pass as a twin. They looked damn near the same. My stepmom was religious, so she claimed I saw her sister's ghost, going to watch over my dad. I'm not so much religious, so I have no idea what I saw, but it was definitely freaky to think about. Around 10 years ago, my mom took me and my two siblings to Sea Life Park in Hawaii. For a while, you'll be driving alongside a cliff range on your way out. Anyway, we were heading back home along this road when a noise shook the car. It was loud enough where it made us all flinch. My mom thought a rock had fallen on the roof of our car, since there were cliffs to the right of us. She decided to pull into a golf course parking lot to check the damage. But there was nothing. The car was spotless. Confused, we went back onto the main road, just to discover an accident that had occurred a little ahead of us. The car in the crash was the one behind us before we had pulled into the parking lot. It might have just been a lucky coincidence, but I believe a guardian angel saved my family and I from a car crash. I grew up in central Indiana, in the 9-county region. My parents had kids before they were ready, and it resulted in us not having much money growing up. My parents struggled to make ends meet, and it resulted in my grandparents raising me for large portions of the day, so that both my parents could work. My grandparents' home had a storied past. It was built in the mid-1800s, prior to the onset of the Civil War. Supposedly, the first owner was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and this resulted in the house having false walls that opened up to small enclosed areas. It was bizarre, but my friends thought it was the coolest thing to have these tiny passages throughout the house. My father actually grew up in the place too. It was a 2-story, single-family dwelling with an attic and a basement. Growing up, my father and grandfather would crack jokes about Mr. Cooper. I didn't know anyone by that name, and when I asked, my father would always say that the guy was just the previous owner of the home. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just knew that my father wasn't overly fond of the second floor of the home, and wouldn't take anything upstairs to the second floor unless the sun was out. Again, as a child, I thought nothing of this, and I only stayed on the first floor anyway. My grandparents died when I was a child, and left the home to my father because of his financial issues at the time. There were 3 bedrooms at the top of the stairs, with a staircase leading down to the first level. My brother and I were forced to share one of these rooms because the middle bedroom had been converted into a junk room over time by my grandparents. They were born prior to the onset of the Great Depression and rationing in World War II. As a result, they kept everything and just stored it in this one room. The door was hard to open because of the amount of junk in there, and it was stacked so densely that there wasn't really anywhere to walk. If you've ever seen an episode of Hoarders, that one room looked like that, just without the dead animals and decaying food. My sister had the third bedroom to herself, which we refer to as the blue room, because the walls were painted blue. My grandmother seemed to dread that particular room, but again, as a child, I thought nothing of it. My bedroom and the blue room were the locations of the only two false walls that I knew about. Both of the closets had a wall that required a minimal amount of force to expose a smaller closet on the other side. Because my grandmother died when I was a child, I had never thought to ask why she hated that room. I know why she hated it now. It only took a year to find out. On Christmas Eve in 2001, I was sleeping in the blue room with my brother and sister. The house predated central heating and cooling. Instead, the house had a fireplace that heated the entire house through a network of pipes that fed the smoke through a couple of chimneys. We also depended on window-mounted air conditioners to cool the house in each room. The window units had analog dials to set the temperature that made a click sound whenever you turned them. As such, we tended to congregate in whichever room was cooler or hotter to sleep in. On that particular night, it was the blue room. Later that night, I was woken up by the bedroom door sliding open slightly. We had pets, so I assumed that one of the animals wanted to warm up too. As I attempted to go back to sleep, I heard the air conditioner come on and the clicking of the thermostat. I sat up to look over at the machine and saw nothing there, just the dial turning back and forth. I yelled for my sister to get up, and the dial suddenly stopped turning. At that moment, the door shut the rest of the way on its own. My brother was still sound asleep, but my sister and I sat there terrified. We had to yell for our parents to turn on the stairway light, which was on the other side of the door, before either of us would leave. Needless to say, I never slept in that room again. Flash forward a couple of years to somewhere in 2003 or 2004. My dad worked his tail off to get a high-paying position that resulted in us doing some renovations to the house, including my bedroom. At that time, the only unusual activity I had ever heard was footsteps upstairs every once in a while during the night and periods where I felt like I was being watched or I wasn't alone, despite knowing that no one else was there. Because of the renovations, the curtain rods had not yet been installed on my bedroom windows. The only bedroom windows that I had faced a country road that ran just in front of the house, which resulted in any car going by having its headlights flood my bedroom with light. It was late that night, and I woke up to a scratching sound coming from the wall behind my bed. The sound was so loud that my brother woke up too. This wasn't especially odd, as we had some vermin get into the walls during the renovations, and we're still in the process of getting them out. However, it didn't stop at scratching. What was scratching turned into what sounded like finger tapping on the wall, and then full-blown knocking. To this day, I believe these sounds came from that hidden room. My brother and I shot up out of bed as soon as we heard the knocking, and were grabbing our stuff to leave. At that moment, I immediately got that feeling like I wasn't alone again. A passing car suddenly filled the room with light, and because of the physics of light coming from the passing car, it basically provided light to the room in stages, and then faded out. As the light began to fade, my brother and I saw a dark humanoid figure standing by the window. It didn't have any features. I just remember it being a figure, and it was gone once all the light was gone from the room. My brother and I then dashed out of the room screaming. From that point on, we refused to sleep up there at all, and slept downstairs in the living room. Quite frankly, I didn't want to go up there for anything anymore. Flash forward again to 2010. I don't go up there for anything beyond clothes, and, like my father, will only go so long as the sun is out. The unexplained footsteps still happen once in a while, but nothing prepared me for what was going to happen on one particular night. I had already been a couple of years into college at this point, and went to an out-of-state university just to get away from the place. So, I was only there for a few weeks out of the entire year. My brother was going through some mental health stuff at the time, and destroyed the door at the bottom of the staircase leading upstairs by tearing it off of the hinges. My father just left it there in the stairwell to fix it later, but never got around to the later. I was sleeping on the couch in the downstairs living room, where I had been sleeping since the incident in 2004. My brother and sister were out with friends, and my parents had gone out on a date night, leaving me alone with the animals. I woke up to my cats hissing at what I assumed was one another, but upon closer inspection, appeared to be the dining room where that doorway to the staircase was. Suddenly, I heard a series of footsteps in the junk room directly above the living room where I was. I was caught off guard because, again, there wasn't anywhere to walk in that room. I then heard the creaking of the door leading to the junk room, which again made no sense. The door opens heading into the room, and there was so much crap in there that my father couldn't bear to part with it after the death of his parents, and you couldn't open it easily. I was already getting up to head out into the dining room because the front door to the house was there. I had no intention of staying in that place by myself with Mr. Cooper. Suddenly, those footsteps sounded like they were jogging down the stairs to come into the dining room with me. I realized that they were getting closer to ground level, and I made a beeline for the front door. Just as I was leaving, I heard the sound of a crash as the broken door flew across the room and into a cabinet and smashed one of its glass walls. The footsteps were so loud, I could hear them darting back up the stairs. I drove away from the area to a department store a few miles away and told my parents to meet me there. I refused to ever be in that home alone again. Thankfully, once I got back to college, my parents informed me that my father had gotten a new job across the country and that I wouldn't have to go back to that house. I don't know what Mr. Cooper is, but the house was ultimately torn down. We couldn't sell it because nobody wanted it. The person who ultimately bought it wanted it exclusively for the land and not the structures on it. It was to their benefit. I couldn't imagine putting anyone else through what I saw, and I don't know if my parents would have been forthright over it out of fear it would scare buyers away. In any case, I'd say that Mr. Cooper got what he wanted because we all left, but he's homeless now.